Welcome to today's video, and what we're going to try and do is show you how we're recording your Midnight Train to Malvern project for your radio play performance. So hopefully, because of music, you've got a bandlab account, and if you haven't, try and get one. It works nicely in the app on phones, iPads and tablets, so that's a good way of doing this if you don't have access to a laptop. And we can use the microphone on your phone, iPad, tablet or laptop to be our source material. So once you've got onto bandlab, your account's all up and running, you go to create at the top there, and we go to voice/mic, and then we go in there. I've got no idea why that's appeared, so we'll just take that away, and you can see that I've got my microphone enabled. You might need to go to the microphone symbol, which is in the same bar as your search bar at the top of the screen, and just change your settings if you don't have access to that. And this meter is really useful because you can see when I'm talking louder. If we need to make sure that you don't get too loud, because then it's going to be difficult to do everybody else as well. Right, I'm going to name my channel, which is over here, just by double clicking on it, and the name of the character that I'm recording is Ben. Next, I need my script, which is there, and we are only going to read our character's bits. You don't need to leave a gap for the other character, you'll see why later on. You just need to read your lines and you try and make it interesting. So, need to press record. When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it. But there won't be a knock on the door. When the bloke comes in, shut the door behind him. And then we can see the waveforms come up and we can test what we're playing. When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door, etc. So I'm just going to press save here, and this is really important. And then hopefully bandlab will give me the choice of naming it something. So I press save, and where it says new project, I'm going to put Ben, and saving your work with the right name is super important now, I can't stress this enough, and the name of the play, which in my case is called The Dumb Waiter. Really important that you file everything correctly. Once you've finished your recording and you're happy with it, don't worry about anything else. All you need to do is go to exit, and we've got the file name there. You see the whole project. Now you're going to need to share this with your friends, so you go to download, and medium quality MP3 is fine, and download. Once you've got all your voices assembled, probably by emailing them to each other or sharing them on OneDrive via the attachment, make sure you've got a folder where they're all saved, preferably on your desktop. That does make life a lot easier to do the next stage. So now you're going to do a new window, a new project. So we go to create again, and we're going to do voice mic. And first thing we do is we keep creating channels, or tracks I should say, old school me, for each of the characters in your performance. And it's going to be a voice mic one every time. And GarageBand, I've tested it up to 10 tracks. Sorry, bandlab, I've tested it up to 10 tracks and you don't seem to have a problem with that. So you should be okay. Once you've created the channels for each of your characters, you need to know where your files are saved. And mine are in my downloads. Okay. And I've got one here, and I'm going to drag him there. And I'm just going to make sure he's right at the beginning. And then the next part, I'm going to keep doing that, and that comes across over here. And notice at this point, I'm not worried about the spacing. I'm not worried about them overlapping. It will sound terrible if you're playing together. Got to have a try.
Stand behind the door.
So that's not the exercise. Next exercise is once you've got all your characters in, it will sound horrendous, but that's part of the fun. You need to use this S button, which stands for solo. And then you'll hear one character by itself.
Stand behind the door.
Okay, and it looks like I've got my parts the wrong way around, so I need to cheat a little bit, which is always good.
When we get the call.
Right, that's better. So that's the first voice I need to hear. Now this guy will go back up here. It's called them the wrong names for some reason. Next job is we're going to use this split function up here. Okay, slice at playhead, it will say when you hold your finger or mouse over it. And you need to cut it up with all the gaps where your lines stop. So I need to do a slice at door, which is dead easy. Go back over here.
When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door.
So, and that's gone wrong. So I'm using the undo function, which is there. And I need to make sure if it is slicing the wrong thing, that's because I need to highlight there. So I'm glad that happened, so we can show you. It's a learning experience, children.
When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door.
Right, so that's where I want my slice. Bosh. And we do that all the way through.
If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it.
Etc. Once you've sliced up the first character, you then need to repeat the process for your remaining characters. So we take the solo function off, which is the S button, and then we go down to the next character and we do the same thing. This button is really useful, by the way, it takes you right back to the beginning. We'll see you in a second.
Stand behind the door. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it. So I won't answer it. When the bloke comes in, shut the door behind him.
Right, so I've got both my characters all sliced up now. Next job, you will have more of the characters to do probably, but it's all possible. Next job is to start creating the dialogue correctly. So I'm just going to move stuff in batches. So I know that this guy over here, he can all go over there to begin with. That will make your life a lot easier. And then all of these slices, leaving the very first line, can go over here. That is absolutely fine. Now I'm going to go back to the beginning using this function here, and I'm going to drag this guy around so we can experiment with the timing. And that's not working because I've got the S function on. It's all a learning experience, children. There we go.
When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door. Stand behind the door.
And then we can start assembling things bit by bit. I won't bore you.
Behind the door. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it.
You'll have to excuse my voice acting. I tried very hard to make it sound like two different people. Should have got my wife to do this for you instead. She's brilliant at this stuff. Right, I think that first one there is too soon.
Stand behind the door. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it.
And then Playing with the timings and experimenting with the timings, you can move everything back to where you need it bit by bit, and it carries on.
But there won't be a knock on the door, so I won't answer it.
And you can start to assemble your dialogue like that. Nothing wrong with silence if you need it. And say you've got some hissy bits, like this one here is a bit hissy. I am just going to slice off the bits which are rustling, and then use backspace to delete it.
Stand behind the door.
So it sounds better. Right, finishing touches, adding music or Foley, which we call sound effects. Very simple to do once you know your way around a bit. I recommend you choose instrumental music because having somebody singing vocals and words will detract from your dialogue, and the audience their ear will naturally go to the singer. So you want to avoid that if possible. So select a piece of music that sets the tone and the atmosphere that you're trying to create. And there's loads of stuff out there. And I've got one over here which I'm going to try and use. And I'm going to drop in here. And I'm going to move it to the beginning. Now, when I play this to you, you'll probably notice that everything happening at once is not great.
When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door. Stand behind the door.
So that's not working for lots of reasons. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag round all of my dialogue, and I'm going to move it back to a decent point so it comes in at the right time. So have a listen from the beginning.
When we get the call, you go over and stand.
So I think I could just go back a little bit further. You can be hours tweaking this stuff.
When we get the call,
So that seems to happen at a nice point in the music. Now you'll notice at this point the track is too loud, so we can then do some other stuff which I've completely forgotten how to do. There we are. That's the button I'm after. Now this button here is like an automation type thing. So if we draw dots on stuff here, we can move things out of the way. And I really recommend that you do like a horizontal line followed by a ramp. You want to avoid a seesaw ziggy zag type effect. Okay, so let's see how that works.
when we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door. Stand behind the door. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer it. If there's a knock on the door, you don't answer.
So that could possibly go away a little bit earlier. You can spend ages making these decisions. And then if you want to bring the music back at the end of your piece, you can just do something like that. This automation function also works really well if you've got differences between people's voice levels. So one person might be recorded really hot, the other person will be recorded really quiet. So you can just use the automation function which is there to change your levels. It's really useful. You can also do things like add effects. So if you want these two to sound like they're in an absolute massive cavern, you would go to effects at the bottom, add effects, and then something like reverb would be great. So let's try Space Maker and see what happens. It will sound ridiculous now. I'm just going to mute the music. There we go.
When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door.
And let's make that absolutely ridiculous so you can really hear the difference. Because we can.
When we get the call, you go over and stand behind the door.
I realise that will give some of you nightmares. So you would do the same with sound effects. Any sound effects that you wanted to add, you would repeat the process, adding a track, find the MP3 that you want to drop in, and then add it to the right place, move stuff around. At the end of the whole thing, to share it and email it into your staff member, you go to exit and you do all your save your changes, etc. And you need to give it a name, that kind of thing. And then do the sharey thing that we did earlier on. There's a better explanation earlier in the video. Right, it's late. That's enough to do for the time being. That should seriously keep you busy for a good number of weeks.